In this video, I'm going to be testing the much loved Sigma 85mm f1.4 DG DN lens against the older Sigma 85mm f1.4 DG HSM lens to figure out which one of these is the best and whether it's worth selling the old one to get the new. I should start off this test by saying that recently Sigma have officially decided to discontinue manufacturing the old 85mm lens for mirrorless cameras. Rest in peace, my friend. Rest in peace. And so now this lens is only being made for DSLR mounts. However, you can still buy used copies of this lens online, and I know a lot of you out there already own this lens, have had it for years, and will be asking yourselves whether it's time to ditch it in favour of the new version. Well, today I hope to answer that question, but before we can do that, we need to start off by looking at some of the stats for both of these lenses. These days you can buy a copy of the Sigma 85mm f1.4 DG HSM lens on eBay for between £700 and £750 or $800 and $1,000 in the US, depending on the condition of the lens. In terms of weight, this thing is a bit of a beast, coming in at 1.1 kilograms or 38.8 ounces. And when compared side by side to the newer model, this thing absolutely dwarfs it. Though that's not really that much of a surprise, seeing as this lens was originally developed for full-frame DSLRs, which are obviously much bigger, and was later repurposed to fit onto mirrorless cameras. You can even clearly see where they've simply slapped on an extra bit on the base of this lens to make it fit onto Sony E-mount cameras. The lens itself is made from a mixture of hard plastics and metal, and despite its age, this lens actually feels super solid in terms of build quality. It features a smooth focusing ring, a manual MF to AF switch, and also a focus distance indicator on the side of the lens barrel. On the metal lens mount, there's even a small rubber O-ring that provides some weather sealing to prevent dust and moisture entering the camera body when this lens is attached. Moving over to the new Sigma 85mm f1.4 DG DN, and on Amazon you can purchase this lens brand new for £995 or $1,080. When it comes to weight, this lens comes in at 635 grams or 22.4 ounces, making it almost half the weight of the old Sigma. So needless to say, this thing feels much better balanced when attached to my full frame Sony A7III. On the outside of the lens there's a manual aperture ring that can be declicked via a dedicated declick switch. This aperture dial can also be set to auto mode, shown as an A, allowing you to alter the aperture with your camera dials like most other lenses. You can also keep this dial fixed into auto mode using this handy lock switch on the side of the lens barrel. Also on the side of the lens barrel there's an MF to AF switch, as well as a customizable button that acts as a shortcut to a variety of camera settings. Finally, on the lens mount there's weather sealing, much like the older Sigma. So after looking at the specs, although the old Sigma is slightly cheaper in terms of price, in terms of handling, the new Sigma just wins hands down. It's much smaller and lighter weight, making it much nicer for full-frame mirrorless cameras. In terms of build quality, both lenses are very well built, so I don't think you'd have any complaints with either of these options on that front. Next up in our test, we need to see how both of these lenses will handle while shooting out in the field. During our shoot with Amber, I didn't come across any noticeable issues with either lens, and both were able to lock on and track Amber's movements whilst I had face detection and IAF enabled on my Sony A7III. With IAF deactivated, both lenses operated quickly and quietly in good lighting conditions with no obvious signs of hunting. In low light, the performance was pretty much unchanged for both of these lenses, and again, there was no signs of hunting. So at the end of this round of testing, I think both lenses are winners. Switching over to video mode, and when shooting wide open with both of these lenses, the new Sigma was able to track Amber as she walked towards the camera with no issues at all. However, with the older Sigma attached, the focusing was noticeably slow to react and would occasionally drop focus as Amber got nearer to the camera. After repeating this test with Amber moving at a slightly faster pace this time, the new Sigma was again able to keep up with no issues, but the old Sigma struggled to keep locked on throughout the walk yet again. That means at the end of this test, I think it's fairly obvious which is the winner when it comes to AF performance in video mode, and that's the new Sigma. When it comes to AF noise, both of these lenses operate very quietly. Okay, so let's talk about bokeh now, and I'm pleased to say that both of these lenses produce a lovely smooth blur which is ideal for portraits. With a super wide maximum aperture of f1.4, these lenses are perfect for creating plenty of separation between your subject and the background. In our Bokeballs test, the results were fairly similar, with both lenses offering nice round orbs in the center of the frame, which slowly turned into an elliptical shape as they neared the edges of the image. So when it comes to scoring for bokeh, I would say that both lenses are very evenly matched and they both deserve a point in this round. Moving over to the lens chart now, and when shooting wide open with the old Sigma, we can see that there is a small touch of barrel distortion at the edges of the frame, as well as some dark corners caused by vignetting. At the center, this lens produces a nice sharp image, though there is a touch of chromatic aberration, which isn't ideal. At the corners, the sharpness drops off a touch, but the chromatic aberration doesn't really get any worse, so overall, this is a pretty good performance for this lens. The minimum focusing distance for this lens is 85 centimeters or 33.5 inches, and at this distance it still offers a nice sharp image, although there are still noticeable traces of chromatic aberration on our test chart. Switching over to the new Sigma, and at very first glance you might be tempted to thrust a pencil right into your eyeball. This thing has a killer amount of pincushion distortion. However, Sigma do state that this was all somewhat intentional. Sigma state that in order to keep the lens small and sharp, they had to sacrifice some of the in-lens corrections, namely those elements that correct for lens distortion and vignetting. And this decision was made mainly because these types of lens issues are very easily corrected these days using Sony's in-camera lens corrections, or if you shoot in RAW, using the lens correction profiles that are available to you in Lightroom or Photoshop. And to be fair, they're really not wrong. As you can see here, once the lens correction profile has been enabled in Lightroom with a click of a button, the lens distortion issues are pretty much entirely gone. At the center, this lens is very sharp, noticeably sharper than the old lens, and there are no signs of chromatic aberration either. At the corners, this lens still stays very sharp, and there's still no signs of chromatic aberration at all. The new Sigma has an identical minimum focusing distance as the old Sigma of 85 centimeters or 33.5 inches, and at this distance, images are still razor sharp with no signs of chromatic aberration. So on paper, the new Sigma lens offers a definite step up in terms of image quality versus the older lens. But how does this translate into real world images? Well, we're looking at some of the images that I've taken so far with these lenses. I think it's fair to say that both of these lenses are capable of producing great results with plenty of contrast. Both lenses create images with natural looking skin tones, and there's no noticeable signs of color cast, which is great. From a distance, it's really hard to tell the results apart from these two images, especially when shooting wide open at f1.4. However, when you zoom in closely, you can tell that the new Sigma is the sharper one, which backs up the results from our lens chart. I think, although it's a very close call, the new Sigma is definitely the sharper of the two lenses, and it also doesn't suffer from any chromatic aberration issues. So for those reasons alone, I think it deserves to win the point in this final round of scoring. So, is the new Sigma worth the upgrade? Well, in my opinion, yeah, it really is. For the sake of a couple of £100 or dollars, not only are you getting a sharper lens that's great for both photo and video use, but it's also a hell of a lot lighter and nicer to use in general, which means that you're far more likely to actually want to go out and shoot with it. In a nutshell, ditch the old glass, buy the new one, you won't regret it. If you're curious to see how both of these lenses handle themselves against the likes of the Sony 85mm f1.4 G Master and the Samyang 85mm f1.4, then be sure to check out my group test video below.